Okay, welcome to Beccaro and Hook Enlightened Dissent. It's good to be with you for our second podcast. I am Steve Hook, and we are very happy to have you aboard today. We've got a big show for you today. We're going to talk about, we got to talk about this interview on CNN. This apparently there was 41 minutes taped, 18 minutes aired of the Kamala Tim Walz lifeguard interview. So we'll check in with that. But first, let's check in with my illustrious co-host, Tom Del Beccaro. Hello, Tom. How are you, sir? Good to see you, man.
Great to see you. Glad to be doing number 2 here. We have a great guest today, my good friend Stephen Moore, who's going to talk about what lies ahead in economics and why I think this is the most consequential economic election certainly in our lifetime and maybe 100 years worth.
You know, it's funny because whenever we talk about this is the most consequential election, it's really by every metric, isn't it? Economically, it's the most consequential. Foreign policy-wise, it's the most consequential. Our border policy is the most everything. You could just go down the checklist, and it's very consequential, which kind of underscores the fact that what did you think of the interview? We're going to play a couple of bites of it, but what did you think of it, Tom? You watched it. I wasn't impressed.
Well, so all these things, of course, happen in a set of circumstances, right? And these were self-imposed circumstances. They decided that they weren't going to do interviews for some 40 days, right? So they made this interview, the tension leading up to it, rose and rose because there was nothing. If they had been given interviews every day for 40 days, no one would have thought very much of this, right? So they created this tension themselves. And so given that, and also there was this issue of her, whether she's prepared for the office. So when they chose to do a joint effort, then that opened the door for people to say, oh, well, we don't think you're prepared, and now you're bringing along a lifeline, right? Yeah. So again, self-imposed. And then for the actual interview, first of all, the optics were awful. I'm sorry, you dressed in gray? Who dresses in gray to talk about optimism and what's that word? Joy. That's right. And joy. I've never seen the word joy associated with gray. So I thought the optics were bad. And remember, optics are a big deal. I just saw the movie Reagan, a phenomenal movie. Everybody should go see that. Michael Deaver always talked about the optics of it. And then, of course, which I know you're going to hit on in just a second here. Yes, she was underwhelming, but she also was, not honest. Can I say that?
Yeah. Well, you can say it, and I agree with it. She was underwhelming, and I think she underperformed. And you know what, Tom? You bring up a great point. This was self-inflicted because they insisted on this was like the basement campaign 2.0. I don't think it's going to work for Kamala Harris, and I think that we're starting to see the chinks in the armor there, especially with this horrible optics, as you mentioned, really bad. I mean, Tim Walz should have just been sitting there in a lifeguard chair, ready to throw the.
But it did look like he was sitting way above her too.
Yeah. Looking over her shoulder. It was absolutely insane. The gray outfit was ridiculous, although I couldn't help but notice that Tim Walz dressed as Trumpian as he could, red tie and all that. Let's do a little clip of it, Tom. This is kind of a long one. We may have to cut it off, but because we have a great guest today who knows economics like the back of his hand, Stephen Moore, I want to hear Kamala's take on the economy. This is from the interview, well, portions of the interview that we got to see anyway. This is cut 1, Kamala on the economy and her plans. Cut 1.
You are well aware that right now many Americans are struggling. There's a crisis of affordability. Yeah. One of your campaign themes is we're not going back. But I wonder what you say to voters who do want to go back when it comes to the economy specifically, because their groceries were less expensive, housing was more affordable when Donald Trump was president.
Well, let's start with the fact that when Joe Biden and I came in office, during the height of a pandemic, we saw over 10 million jobs were lost. Literally, we were all tracking the numbers. Hundreds of people a day were dying because of COVID. The economy had crashed. In large part, all of that because of mismanagement by Donald Trump of that crisis.
Let's stop it right there.
Oh, God.
Okay, two things. They were all in favor of a shutdown.
They pushed it.
They all said he should listen to Fauci. And oh, by the way, it was the red states that shut down the hardest. No, I'm sorry, the blue states that shut down the hardest and the longest. It was Newsom's decision. It was New York's decision. It was not Trump's decision.
It was Minnesota's decision too, Tom. Got to throw in Minnesota for Tim Walz.
Thank you. So they're blaming it on Trump is part of the dishonest. So let's go back to her and see what the next, how shall I say, dishonest comment was.
Okay, we'll do that. Let's do that. Let's go. This is her talk. Now, one of the things that we've talked about with this economy, and everybody has been, is the way we've stifled our domestic energy policy here in a big way. Federal lands are basically been locked down for drilling and fracking and whatnot. Here's Kamala Harris on her flip-flop on fracking. Cut 2.
I want to get some clarity on where you stand on some key policy issues. Energy is a big one. When you were in Congress, you supported the Green New Deal. And in 2019, you said, quote, "There is no question I'm in favor of banning fracking." Fracking, as you know, is a pretty big issue, particularly in your must-win state of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020, that I would not ban fracking. As vice president, I did not ban fracking. As president, I will not ban fracking.
In 2019, I believe, at a town hall, you said you were asked, would you commit to implementing a federal ban on fracking on your first day in office? And you said, there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So yes. So it changed in that campaign?
In 2020, I made very clear where I stand. We are in 2024, and I've not changed that position, nor will I going forward. I kept my word, and I will keep my word.
What made you change that position?
She's lying, because what happened in that vice presidential debate in 2020 is she said Joe Biden wouldn't ban fracking, right? And he did, by the way, put an extended pause on it with respect to all federal lands. The oil industry today has this maximum output, despite, as you would like to say, or often say, despite what Biden's doing, not because of it. So she just lied there.
I never thought I would hear myself say this, but credit to Dana Bash for at least putting it to her. Kind of softball in a way, but it was high and in. So, I mean, she did connect a little, it was high and in, and she whiffed at it. And you can, I don't know, you can almost sense that Tim Walz's butt cheeks clenched a little bit during that question. He didn't want to go near it. And I don't know how, she said something that we cut off there, but she said something. She said, what was the word she used, Tom? Basically like my
values haven't changed.
That's it. My values haven't changed. Democrats like to use the word dog whistle. Every time Trump opens his mouth, it's a dog whistle. Well, when I hear my values haven't changed, to me, that's a pretty big dog whistle. That means don't believe what I'm saying on the stump. My values are hard left, and I'm going to crack down on energy. Isn't that kind of what you took away?
I don't even know what the hell that means. So I'm switching on the policy, but my values are the same. I don't know what that means, honestly. And more importantly, a couple of more things that come out of this is if you're in Michigan or you're in Pennsylvania, I'm not sure you know what she's going to be doing other than letting taxes increase. And now she claims she's not going to ban fracking. But I don't think America has a clear idea of what she's going to do going forward. And again, this is self-imposed. She has nothing on her website. She's only had her staff come out with a few things on economics. She has said precious little other than price gauging. And yes, I said gauging on purpose because when she read that, she was probably just reading that for the first time. But so when you do this speech and or interview and you haven't done anything for 40 days before, and people are asking what your policies are, and you don't tell them what your policy. I was former chairman of the California Republican Party. I ran for U.S. Senate against Kamala Harris. The first thing a candidate is told, any candidate, whether it's school board or the presidency, why are you running? And she was asked, what are you going to do on day one? Didn't really answer. What are you going to do on day one? Didn't really answer. Came up with the child tax credit, which, by the way, won't happen on day one because that takes legislation. She could not answer. I'm running because I'm going to do these three things. Therefore, the interview in my book, Candidate School 101, she got an F because she should have come out and said, we're going to hit the ground running and we're going to do these three things.
Well, I'll tell you what, Tom, not only that, but by your estimation, it was a failure. The New York Times came out yesterday with the headliner and said, vague and vacuous interview does nothing to help Harris. That's from the New York Times. The CNN panel shows were just littered with people saying it may have moved the ball a little, but not much, which is another way of saying it sucked. Now, we know that they recorded 41 minutes. Only 18 minutes of that 41 minutes made it to air, and apparently a lot of what was left on the editing room floor was the Green New Deal. She is running away from that as fast as she can, but her values haven't changed, Tom. So it's not really gone anywhere. It's just being hidden from us, like the rest of her candidacy.
Yeah, no question about it. And then I don't think that she'll be giving an interview before the debate. And then it'll be questionable when she'll do it after that. This is an incredibly cynical election. I listened to some Democrat operative the other day say she's run a perfect campaign. And this is their definition of perfect. Yeah, be purely emotional. Don't tell anyone really what you're going to do and hoodwink them. That from the saviors of democracy.
And you know, Tom, we got one more clip here that I'll play, but I'll just say this. And that is that what she is doing right now is so disingenuous, and it's obviously so disingenuous. And because this self-inflicted gag on doing any interviews culminated with a horrible interview on, of all places, CNN and Dana Bash, nobody would say that she's anything but a liberal, Dana Bash, but she did a decent enough job, I suppose. What kind of pressure does this put on the Kamala campaign, and for that matter, the Walz campaign and his debate with J.D. Vance, and of course Kamala's with Trump? This is really going to put a big magnifying glass on that debate.
Well, it could, and I really hope that what happens with J.D. Vance is that he stays very simple. I mean, we're just Mr. Fix-It here. Here's what happened under them. Here's the problems at the border. Here's the problems with inflation. And then we're going to do 1, 2, 3. If J.D. Vance comes off like that and let Tim Walz, be his Tim Walz. Oh, I had a grammar mistake. It turns out today, by the way, I don't know if you know that was the starting pitcher for the Yankees in the 2009 World Series. Oops, that's a grammar mistake.
Yeah.
I meant to say, I wish I was.
Yeah, I forgot that one word, that key word. Well, listen, one of the things, and we're going to get this in, I want to get this one in quick because it's one that we've all kind of been scratching our head with. And that is, she's been in office as VP for 3.5 years. Dana Bash asked her essentially, well, why haven't you done any of this already? And here's what she said, cut 3.
You have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already?
Well, first of all, we had to recover as an economy, and we have done that. I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%. The work that we have done to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. Donald Trump said he was going to do a number of things, including allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Never happened. We did it. So now, as I travel in the state of Georgia and around our country, the number of seniors that have benefited, I was in Nevada recently, a grandmother who showed me her receipts. And before we capped the cost of insulin for seniors at $35 a month, she was paying hundreds of dollars, up to thousands of dollars a month for her insulin. She's not doing that
You
any
maintain-
longer.
Okay, well, there you go. So, and you know what though, Tom? She may not be paying the $1,000 a month for insulin, but she is paying $6 for a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk. She is paying about $5 for a pound of cheese. I mean, the inflation can't be ignored, and she's just trying to kind of pretend that it doesn't exist. And hey, look, she's getting insulin. Well, that's good for diabetics, I guess, that are on fixed incomes. But what about the rest of us?
Well, first of all, it's a lie. No one in America pays thousands of dollars a month for insulin. Under Donald Trump, the average, and look, diabetes is an incredibly dangerous and prevalent disease in America today, but they weren't paying thousands, several hundred a month, and maybe she meant thousands for the year, but no one pays thousands a month. So that was a lie. But look, I thought that was a really telling moment for them, because she said, why haven't you done the things you're proposing to do? And basically she said, well, we can only do a couple of things at a time. And that no one's going to buy that. Well, we did this, we did that. How long does it take? Did their executive order take on, quote, insulin? So this just demonstrates once again that her dishonesty on this point. Anyway, folks, we got to wrap up this segment. Coming up, my good friend Stephen Moore, and what you should think about in this election, because this isn't your ordinary economic election. So thanks for sticking with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Enlightened Dissent with Tom Beccaro and Steve Hook. And now I'm most pleased to have a good friend of mine, Trump senior economic advisor, longtime believer in economics. And what I mean by that is he's the kind of guy who actually applies economics to real life instead of applying politics to economics and expecting some other kind of outcome than what history provides us. I'm talking about, of course, Steve Moore, whose new book is coming out with Dr. Arthur Laffer, The Trump Economic Miracle. He's also a founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, who has the goal of helping Americans reach prosperity. Steve, so thanks so much for coming on today.
Hi, Tom. So good to be with you. Congratulations on your new book, and congratulations on your upcoming marriage. That's so exciting.
It is under 30 days. Thanks for distracting me. Now
30 days of freedom, huh?
There you go. So, Steve, I wanted to bring you on. In my mind, this is the most consequential economic election in I don't know how long. And the reason for that isn't just that Kamala Harris is way out there on the left with wanting to create very government-centric policies, but because the listen to me, Trump tax cuts are about to expire. If nothing is done, it's going to have a huge economic impact. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you're right. I mean, this is you couldn't get two candidates that are more far apart in terms of their approach and ideas about the economy. So the way I put it is that Trump is on Venus and Kamala Harris is on Mars, and so there's not a lot that they agree on. She is someone who really does believe that the government can solve all our problems. I go back to Reagan, who used to say very famously, government is not the solution, government is the problem. And I hope the American people understand that, and I hope we'll find out in November. But if she were to be elected with this agenda, I think it would be truly catastrophic for our economy. I think you'd see a 30 to 35% reduction in the value of stocks. That's a huge reduction in valuations. It would kill people's 401k plans. I think it would put in jeopardy America's position as the global economic superpower, frankly. And so she doesn't, to her credit, Tom, I have to give her credit. I mean, she's not, I've been doing this since 1984. So I've lived through, Michael Dukakis. I've lived through, people like Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. They would always kind of run to the middle. But to her credit, she's telling the American people, if you elect me, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a $5 trillion tax increase. I'm going to impose price controls. We're going to have a $2 trillion increase in government spending. And so it is she's probably the most anti-business candidate in American history. And it's all redistribution. And I just pray that the American people don't fall for that.
So
Yeah.
the Trump tax cuts are to expire at the end of 2025. I don't see the Republicans losing the House, so I don't see them agreeing to a tax increase, but I also don't see Kamala Harris able to put together, she's never put together a legislative package in her life. So I think by the end of 2025, you are going to have some sort of point where they expire and they're still talking. So what would be the effect of the expiration? What would happen in the months before, you think? Because people want to invest on a secure future, knowing what's going to happen going forward. So when these expire, what's your thoughts? You've mentioned the market, but what about just business in general, small business especially?
Well, as you know, Larry Kudlow and I and a couple of others put together the first draft of that tax plan in 2017, and I'm very proud of what we accomplished. I think that people should understand that if you allow that tax cut to expire, you're going to see $2,100 per family increase in taxes. So, and by the way, you're right to warn people that she doesn't have to do anything. If she just does nothing, then the tax cut is gone. And so we're in big trouble. Look, the gems of the tax plan were, number one, we cut the highest income tax rate on on corporations from the highest in the world. We were at 40% when you included state and local taxes on corporations. We cut that almost in half, down to about 24 or 25%. And anyone who loves America and wants America to be competitive has to understand we can't be an economically competitive country if we have the highest tax rate in the world. And Trump got that immediately. Anyone who was sensible, you don't have to be a wild-eyed supply sider like Tommy, like you and me, to understand that that is a prescription for disaster if we were to raise the rate way back up again. She wants to double the capital gains tax. She wants to tax unrealized capital gains and a couple of other features for the tax bill that a lot of people are not aware of. And I want to mention these, if I may. One is that if you look at what we did, one of the things we did in that bill was we eliminated essentially eliminated the alternative minimum tax. Remember that tax, Tom?
Yeah. A complicated item that I don't know how people tax plan for that, but
yeah. And everybody hated the alternative minimum tax. And we had 8 million people who were ensnared in the alternative minimum tax before the Trump tax cut. Today, it's about 400,000. We didn't completely eliminate it, but for all intents and purposes, we eliminated it. So if you bring it back, guess what? Next year, boom, 8 million people get hit with the alternative minimum tax. I don't think people are even aware of that. I'll give you another one. We doubled the standard deduction. And the reason we did that was we wanted to simplify the tax system. So now you just deduct, I think the number is, I think it's $25,000 you just deduct. And so today in America, only 9% of Americans itemize their deductions, only 9%. So if you go back to the old system, guess what? 30 to 40% of Americans will, itemize, and that's just much more complicated. I'll mention one other quick thing. Do you remember inversions? Do you remember that?
yeah,
A lot of people probably forgotten about this, but this is when an American company would pack up its bags and leave California or leave New York or leave, Minnesota, and they would go to Ireland or they would go to Switzerland or they would go to the Bermuda and they would relocate. And that was a huge problem for us. And the reason they were doing that was because they could get virtually zero taxes in a lot of these other places. So when there were multiple, every couple of weeks you'd read about in the Wall Street Journal another company inverting. Do you know how many inversions we've had since the Trump tax cut? Zero.
Wow.
Zero. So if you go back to the high rate, we're going to have American companies leaving again. So those are just a few things that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, Ireland was put on the world economic map through inversions, were they not? I mean, companies went there regularly, they lowered their tax rates, and voila, they started to do well. And then they've backtracked on that, and predictably, right?
Yes.
Money goes where it is wanted,
That's right.
and it flows downhill to where it's most wanted.
That's so true. And we really successfully eliminated that practice. But I guarantee you, we will see. We brought, by my estimates, about $1 trillion of capital back in that's the money you're talking about, Tom. We brought about $1 trillion that flowed into the United States. That's investment capital for jobs and businesses created here. If as Arthur Laffer would say, if you turn the dials in one direction, you get a good result. And then if you turn them back in the opposite direction, you're going to have exactly the opposite result, right? I mean, this isn't complicated.
Hi, Steve. By the way, it's good to see you. Welcome to Enlightened Dissent with Beccaro and Hook. We talk about the AMT and we're talking about Kamala's tax plan. And of course, it always comes down to one thing, doesn't it? Tax the rich, soak the rich.
Yes.
The rich aren't paying their fair share. Of course, this is all garbage and gobbledygook. But we know, Steve, that you are one of Trump's economic advisors. We know that Art Laffer is in the back room as well. Who is working on this plan with Kamala Harris? Does anyone know? Is it just the Marxist cabal that nobody sees behind the curtain? Because I haven't heard her lay it out at all, other than we're going to get rid of Trump's tax cuts.
I think the left is driven by a kind of radical redistribution of income. And they, look, just as one example, this foolish $500 billion student loan bailout, they call it a bailout. It's just basically, paying people who didn't pay their loans. It's just a massive redistribution from people who did pay their student loans to people who didn't. And so, we want to create wealth. Right, Steve and Tom, our objective is to create wealth. They want to redistribute wealth. And, when you redistribute wealth, you get less wealth because your incentive to invest, your incentive to save is so radically reduced. And incidentally, guys, I forgot to mention one other thing. If you let the Trump tax cuts expire, about twice as many families will have to pay the hated death tax.
Yeah.
So, that's a really terrible thing too. We should have no death tax. You pay, I think about people like my father, who spent a lifetime building up a business. He paid taxes every payroll taxes, sales taxes, gas taxes, income taxes, this tax, that tax, his whole life. And then he dies and the government's going to take half of what he earned in his life away from him. I mean, that's so un-American. And that will affect about twice as many families.
So, and you just said, I'm sorry, Tom, I just want to chime in for a sec. You just said something, Steve, that I think is absolutely critical. You said it's un-American. And my problem is, I think that their entire platform, whether it's economics, social agendas, it's all un-American. But they have a compliant media that will never, ever kind of spell that out. I mean, if these tax cuts don't expire until the end of 25, she can coast through this election and see no negative consequences. And then a year down the road, after she's elected, God forbid, all of a sudden everybody's going to get walloped with this. How does Trump message that?
Well, I think Trump has to emphasize the fact that he was president for 4 years. In other words, this is an interesting election. It's the first election in our lifetime, certainly, we have essentially two, one administration and the previous administration running against each other. So we can just compare side by side what happened in the 4 years Trump was president and then the 4 years that Biden and Kamala Harris has been president. And by the way, just the other day, she completely embraced Bidenomics. She's not running away from it. She thinks it's a big success. And by the way, anybody who, if you actually think Bidenomics has been a success, you probably should vote for Kamala Harris. And so they don't understand the first thing about supply side economics. They really don't. It's like they're not hardwired to understand these ideas. And I've been wondering, it's been keeping me up at night. What this is not complicated stuff, right, Tom? I mean, it's pretty simple. And I think the answer is they've never, if you look at the big three, if you look at Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Tim Walz is her vice presidential candidate. All three of them have zero business experience. They've never created anything in their life. They've never met a payroll. They've never made a profit. They don't know how a business operates. So I guess these ideas are completely alien to them.
Yeah, I will note, however, that when Biden signed his book deals, he created an
Yeah,
escrow
that's true.
to avoid
So he does
tax.
have business experience.
Yeah,
Uh,
just
But
for
by the way, Tom, that's the other thing. If you look at what's going on with the economy right now, and I would rate the economy as kind of fair to poor. But the sectors of the economy that are growing right now are those that are connected with government. So government employment is growing at a very rapid pace. The green energy industry, the Biden administration just put out this, oh, look, we created 10,000 jobs in the green energy. Well, yeah, are you familiar with Frederick Bastiat's The Seen and the Unseen?
yes, sir.
So this is really one of the most important concepts in economics. I mean, if the government gave us $1 billion, I bet we could create a lot of jobs. I don't know if they'd be, so if they wanted to give us $1 billion, we could say, look, we just created that job. But what they're not saying, okay, what happened to the $1 billion you took from somebody else so my point is, if we hadn't done this stupid green energy stuff, we'd have a lot more jobs and a lot more wealth than we would otherwise. So they just look at the seen, not, as Bastiat would say, the unseen. Well, what's the cost of the economy of you're taking money from the people who are productive?
Yeah, there's also the broken window theory that
That's right.
the same kind of thing. Although we did give billions of dollars to Intel, and they didn't seem to do too well. That can we shift a bit? By the way, in my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization, I talked about the fact that during the 1800s, when Americans had enormous incentives, they created incredible wealth. But it is a law of history that once the civilization moves to this redistributive model, their economic growth falls, their standard of living is curtailed, and in the end, it often costs them their civilization, or at least their form of government. But let's switch to regulations, because I get frustrated when people talk about inflation, because as Milton Friedman told us, it's a monetary phenomenon. But CPI doesn't just measure the printing of money. It is based on, there's a supply and demand element of it. And when you overregulate, you do what? You distort the markets, you drive up energy costs, and it sends up the CPI. So Kamala Harris and regulations, I can't imagine how bad it would get under her.
Well, great point. I mean, we had the reason that the inflation went up was the twofold. One is that we had a big increase in the amount of money in the economy, and we did not have a corresponding increase in the supply of goods and services. And so when the money supply outpaces the supply of goods and services, you're going to get higher inflation. Just like when both Reagan and Trump cut taxes, you had a big, quote, supply side effect. You had an increase in production, and inflation went down. I mean, again, these are pretty simple ideas that nobody in Washington seems to understand. And I think the way that my buddy Art Laffer would say it is, if the economy produces more apples, the price of apples goes down. It doesn't go up. If the economy produces fewer apples, the price of apples goes up. I mean, most junior high school people would understand that concept, but it doesn't seem like many people in the Federal Reserve or in Washington understand it.
Tom, yeah, the thing is as we talk about this, I think that so many people, obviously everybody on the left, Kamala Harris, Walz, and the rest of them, they're locked into this Keynesian way of thinking. Hasn't the Keynesian economic theory been disproven? And I mean, how many times do you have to prove that printing money does not improve an economy, and that redistribution of wealth does not increase wealth? How many times does this lesson have to be learned from the left before they get it? Or are they just ideologically predisposed to this anti-Friedman direction for sure, and certainly more of just the government will do it and the rich people will do it? how many times do they have to learn this lesson?
Yeah. Well, Steve, let me just correct you on one thing. I think, you called what they're doing Keynesian economics. I think it's moved beyond that, even worse. I mean, the whole idea of Keynesian economics was like when you're in a financial crisis or you have a war or some other disruption in the economy, like a pandemic, the government has to step in and spend money. Now, we could argue about whether that makes sense or not. I disagree with Keynesians, but they've gone well beyond that. Now, what they're doing is something called um, it is called modern monetary theory. And this is the idea that some dingbat economists at some second-rate universities came up with a few years ago that says that, because the U.S. has the dollar and world the world reserve currency, we can just continue to borrow and borrow and borrow, and we don't have to worry about paying back the debt and paying back these bills. And so in other words, what Biden did, which is really unprecedented, and this is why I call him and Kamala Harris the most financially reckless administration in American history, is, we were in a recovery. we were in well, COVID was over when they came in, and they still spent $5 trillion. And it had nothing to do with, it's because they wanted to pass this money out to their friends and their colleagues. It was total cronyism and corporate welfare. And so now, and by the way, I worked for Trump. I love Trump. I think he did a lot of great things for the economy, but even he spent way too much money. The last thing we needed when that Biden came in was another $5 trillion on top of that. And so we've got a situation where those debts are going to have to be repaid. And I knew this was going to happen. First, they spent the $5 trillion, and now oh gosh, we got to raise taxes on the rich to pay for the $5 trillion. Well, that is the road to economic ruin, or as F.A. Hayek would say, the road to serfdom. I mean, eventually we're just going to have government running our economy.
Yeah, even FDR was a Morgenthau said, we tried to spend and it didn't work. And they were sensible enough after World War II to wind it down. But this is, I think, the first major in American history, the first major crisis where even though the recovery was coming, they kept their feet on the gas pedal. And isn't that where the inflation came? Because this departure was still going on.
Exactly. And, I think the Democrat who's really pronounced this kind of new democratic theory is, Rahm Emanuel. Remember what he said when Obama came in? He said very famously, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. In other words, what he was saying is, we've had all these crazy liberal programs we wanted to do for 25 years. Now we have an opening to do it because we are taking over in this crisis. And, Obama tried it, right? And it didn't work. People forget how lousy the economy was throughout most of Obama's presidency. And, it was a pretty good experiment, though. Like, what happens when you spend all this money and it didn't work? And then people like Paul Krugman said, oh, the problem under Obama is they didn't spend enough money. They only spent $1 trillion. If we spent $5 trillion, it would be even better. And of course, you just keep doing the same thing. And it just has put us more and more into debt. And now their agenda is to massively raise taxes to reduce that debt. And I'm here to tell you, Tom and Steve, if they were to put in place that program, it would shipwreck the economy. You wouldn't reduce the debt. Tax revenues would collapse because no businesses would be making profits. You would have fewer people working. So it scares me. It really does.
Yeah. One thing, that they always point to, which is funny because they only point to it when it benefits them, is take a look at the Dow, take a look at NASDAQ, take a look at the S&P 500. Wall Street's doing great. Main Street's not doing worth a damn, though. And Wall Street is doing good, I'd say, in spite of Biden, not because of Biden. How is Wall Street going to respond should Kamala win? I mean, all of these gains that we've seen in the last 18 months, 2 years even, they're just going to start to crater, will they not?
That you're raising a really good question. I've been puzzled by this. I mean, Kamala Harris comes out with this, even the New York Times called it a $5 trillion tax increase. And the reporter called me and said, is this the biggest tax increase in American history? I said, no, it is not. It's the biggest tax increase in the history of civilization. And yet the stock market didn't really react at all to that, even though if you put it in place, it would obviously, have a very, very negative effect. And I've been asking my friends on Wall Street, why aren't people reacting to this? Why aren't they taking this seriously? And they said, well, first of all, people, are doubtful that Kamala Harris is going to win. And second of all, they think that if she does win, she's not really going to do this. And I'm like, I don't know. These people are pretty crazy. It's a big bet to think that they're not going to do it. I think they will have a voter mandate to do this. I mean, again, it goes back to what we started at the first place. They're telling the American people, if you elect us, it's going to be like Fidel Castro. And yet, so I would argue if the people vote for her, she probably does have a mandate to do it, and that would cause a collapse. But I don't understand, Tom and Steve, why Wall Street is so passive about this. I mean, you've got a lot of these Wall Street people actually endorsing Kamala Harris.
It is. We got to wind this up. My bigger concern remains that if she got elected, that she'd be so incompetent that they would just expire and the crisis would be.
I agree with that. Well, look, I hope if she does get elected, I hope her incompetence makes it more difficult for her to do the kinds of things she would do. I do think, by the way, if we get, I'm biased, but I think if you elect Trump, I think it's going to be taking like a champagne bottle and shaking it up and then taking that cork off it. I think the economy is really ready to explode. We haven't had much growth now for 10. You've talked about this in your book, Tom. What happened to growth? What happened to prosperity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, thanks so much for visiting with us today. We should probably do this again after the election.
I would love to.
Get the
great. And I can't wait to see you and you take your nuptials. And that's going to be a great, Ann and I are really looking forward to that.
Thanks so very much. We'll be right back.
Okay, welcome back to Del Beccaro and Hook's Enlightened Dissent. What an interview with Stephen Moore. That was wonderful. And he's kind of echoing a lot of what we've talked about, Tom. I think that this hide the ball strategy of Democrats, this is the second campaign in a row for the DNC where they've basically taken the strategy of hide the candidate. And even that interview with Dana Bash on CNN was a perfect example of that. As we've mentioned a couple of times now, apparently they had 41 minutes of tape and they only chose to air 18 minutes of it. And that 18 minutes of it was hand-selected by the Harris campaign. So they said, we want complete editorial control. And by the way, I must just say, as an aside, watching that clip, you're right. Boy, that gray just completely washes her out. I mean, it's crazy. I want to play for you, Tom, real quick, and then get your take on this. This is Donald Trump. Now, it's important to point out, this is Trump giving an interview to the UK's Daily Mail. This is pre-Kamala interview, but boy, howdy, did he nail it on this one. Cut 4.
First thing I want to do is say, why isn't it live? It's not a live interview. It's an interview that's going to be taped and then edited and then put out. So that's not even an interview. Then she's doing it with her vice president sitting there. So she's not very smart. When they ask her a question that she can't answer, she'll just look at him. You answer it. I can't imagine. Everyone's waiting for her to do an interview because she's been a very big failure in interviews before, as you know. A tremendous failure. And she brings in the vice president, who, by the way, isn't so good himself. He's been a disaster, this guy. He has been a disaster. His state is in a state of shock from his governorship. He's been a horrible governor. You look at employment numbers, you look at the people that are leaving, you look at all of the problems. Minneapolis is a burned down. They never built it back. It was terrible. He's been a terrible governor. It was a crazy pick. But he's sitting with her to help her out. So this is not the kind of a person we need as president.
That's
Absolutely.
Absolutely insane. And you know, I'll tell you, I would just say this, that Tim Walz was, I guess, picked, I mean, I can only assume, was picked to help out the Russ I think that strategy has kind of fallen flat on its face as well.
Yeah. When you pick a VP, it's sort of the Hippocratic Oath thing, or I'm sorry, the do no harm first as a doctor. That's what you should do as a doctor. So do no harm, but it turns out that he can't get off square one. His answer as to why he lied about carrying a gun into war is likely one of the worst answers I've ever seen in studying history. I mean, for him to say that it was a grammar mistake is unbelievable. But he's not going to be helpful with her. We got 70 something days left. I don't see how it is that she can get away with this, but maybe she can. The Biden thing, hid in the basement. They got away with that. Obama wasn't overly specific. They got away with that. So can she get away with this? Now, look, this all turns on the debate. I debated her twice, and her answers were wandering. Always they were wandering and often not answering the question. Even the Chronicle in my debate with her said that she gave some answer, and then the guy from the Chronicle, SF Chronicle, very liberal newspaper, said, okay, but will you answer the question? And so we're going to see her on a debate stage. It'll be a lot of pressure for her if they ask her those tough questions. And I think Dana Bash asked her a few questions. Why didn't you do this? I mean, she should have been prepared for these, but she just blamed Trump. And remember, elections are about the future. They're not about the past as much. And if all she's going to go up there is say it's Trump's fault, that's not going to win over voters. So with that, we're going to start to wind up the show. But first, I want to go to my lessons of the week. As people know, I came out with my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization. And there's a lot of lessons in that are applicable today. In fact, chapter 10 alone is called America, Capitalism, and Socialism. How did we wind up in a place where people can nominate people like Kamala Harris, who says we should wind up in the same place, everyone, or Tim Walz, who went to China 30 times and was feted by the Chinese government. I mean, aren't they a long way away? I saw the movie Reagan, and Reagan wanted to stop the spread of communism. He wasn't afraid of it as an idea, but he wanted to make sure the West transcended it. So how did we get here? And part of that is earlier in the segment with Steve Moore, we talked about these crises. Well, what I do in chapter 10 is go through some of the crises in the American history where the answer was ever more government. And that's really, Steve, where I think Kamala Harris is coming from. Yeah. She's going to wind up, let's say she gets elected. And my view is if she got elected, that the House wouldn't go with her, but she'd get elected. The Bush tax cuts would do what? They'd expire. We'd get into an economic crisis.
Trump tax cuts.
Yeah. Why do I do that? The Trump tax cuts would expire. We'd be in economic malaise. People would be thrown out of work. And then what would be Kamala Harris's reaction, right? Wouldn't she just want to spend a ton more money?
Yeah. Well, we just know that her values haven't changed, whatever the hell that means. So.
That's still, okay. I don't know I do know what her values are, but I just thought that was just an amazing non sequitur. Yeah. Anyway, we should wrap it up here, Steve. So why don't you give your best closing?
Well, my best closing is this. Kamala Harris came to the plate and she whiffed. She absolutely struck out. I don't think that there was, usually after these kinds of interviews, you have a panel sitting around and saying, well, let's break down the good, the bad, the ugly. They weren't breaking down anything good. It was pretty much the bad and the ugly. And I think that this has put a brand new emphasis on the importance of this debate. And I hope Trump reels back some of the attack mode Trump and kind of goes with the soft-spoken Trumpian, this is what I'm going to do, and just hand it to her. Because without Tim Walz there and without an earpiece, I don't know how she's going to perform, but I bet a lot of people want to know. And it's not going to be good, I suspect.
Yeah, what I'm looking for out of this debate, in addition to what you just said, is that, and I think she previewed some of it in this quote unquote interview, is that, look, she is an insecure person. That's why she has that nervous laugh. But also what happens is, and when you saw this, where she often looked away from when she was talking to Dana Bash. Now, some people think she was reading notes. I don't agree with that. When you are saying stuff to which you don't really believe, and or you're making it up as you go along, it is psychology 101 that you look away from the person who has put you on the spot. And even more so, if you're lying, you don't look someone straight in the eye. That's normal. Normal people, sociopaths can do that, but normal people cannot do that. And so one more element is people who are making stuff up or aren't sure of their answer become overly serious to compensate for it. So what I'm looking for in this debate is her being rather dour throughout it, because in her mind, she has to feel like she has to be tougher, and she's going to say tough things, and that she's going to be overly dour. But we'll have to see. It'll be interesting, and we want to thank everyone for coming. Where you can find us on YouTube, you can find us on Rumble. Also, we're going to post this on Twitter and Facebook, and we appreciate you being here. Steve, I will see you next week. Will I not?
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. I look forward to it. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks. And go get your copy of Lessons in the American Civilization by our good friend here, Tom Del Beccaro. Tom, it was wonderful today, my friend.
All right, everybody. Take care. See you next time around.
Bye.